going to talk a little bit about that here this morning with Sean Themea. He is the Chief of Staff at Young Americans for Liberty, and he's on the other end of our line. Good morning, Sean. How are you?
Hey, Rich, doing fine. Great to be here.
Great to have you with us as well. So there's a group out there called Roots Action who this week told Fox News of plans to run a campaign that they call Don't Run Joe, and it's set to launch in November following the midterm elections. Sean, what is your take on that? Because I would think that there would be more Democrats, I mean, Republicans, yes, of course, but more Democrats who may feel the same way.
Yeah, talking to college students out there across the country, there's one thing that's uniting these libertarian, conservative, and far left students on campus, and that's that none of them want Joe Biden to be president after 2024. I mean, if at all. I mean, he has certainly let down the vast majority of Americans with this inflation policy. I mean, he's being very explicit when he says we must sacrifice Ukraine, we must continue paying at the pump. I mean, exposing that, hey, there's really no plan to lower these gas prices or this rampant inflation. And on top of that, I mean, he's let down his progressive base as well. I mean, day one said he's going to stand up for workers and be the big labor president, cancels the Keystone Pipeline. Continues to dangle out, I might cancel student loans, I might not. I mean, we don't think he's going to, and I think that's a good thing, but the progressives don't like that either. So I think his constituency at this point is really one, maybe two people. I mean, you've got Hunter Biden and maybe his wife. Hard to tell if she wants him to run again. But yeah, things aren't looking good for him, and that has consequences in the midterms for the rest of the party.
You mentioned inflation, and that's obviously, I would say, the top issue that comes to the minds of everyone when it comes to President Biden's shortcomings, if you will. A lot of other issues that Republicans are kind of hammering the president on would be stuff like, like immigration, the situation down on the border. Any other issues, like aside from inflation, that you feel Democrats may feel a little bit let down as a result of some of Biden's policies and actions over the last 2 years, or maybe inactivity, depending on your point of view?
Yeah. Well, I think inflation is the big one. It's an equal opportunity destroyer because it doesn't matter if you voted for Biden, voted for Trump, voted for the Libertarian Party candidate, didn't vote at all. I mean, you're paying for it. It's a regressive tax, too. It hurts, the poorest of folks, the folks who are just struggling to get by. So, that is the big one. I mean, the Democrats might try and make this, to turn out votes, a social issues election, maybe lean into abortion and guns, which is going to animate some people. But that doesn't overcome, the old saying from the 90s, it's the economy, stupid. And so, above it all, inflation, I think, is the big issue now. But yeah, I mean, progressives, when it comes to progressives letting down other progressives, I mean, Biden's in good company. You've got AOC, who goes and votes for, the NDAA and for the $40 billion to Ukraine, votes for Nancy Pelosi, right? A lot of these folks, when they get in power, they run as anti-establishment, but then they become the establishment. And more than ever, with access to the internet, access to the voting records, young people are waking up to that, and they're not just, being satisfied to vote for the status quo anymore.
Do Democrats feel, in general, are they feeling the same way about, say, for example, Vice President Kamala Harris, or maybe some of the other top Democrats that are in office, mainly those who have supported President Biden's policies, or maybe they just haven't commented at all. They haven't criticized the president on anything. Do any vibe there? Any idea on how some of these Democrats who are critical of Biden, whether or not they're maybe they're critical of Kamala Harris and others? Do you know?
Yeah, well, I remember when Kamala was running in 2019, 2020, getting a pulse on what young people thought. You see a lot of chatter on the internet out there about how they were dissatisfied that she's a cop. I mean, Kamala is a cop was trending on the internet for the whole primary. They don't think that she is very authentic. They oppose her on criminal justice reform and her past there. Those two things alone, I think, are the big killers there. And that's why, she didn't advance very far in the Democrat primary at all. So, Democrats have already rejected her once. Young people think that she is, too, law and order isn't the right term, but that she's wrong on a lot of things with criminal justice reform during her tenure in California.
Right.
So I don't think that she's very viable either.
Interesting. We have just about a minute left here with Sean Themea, Chief of Staff at Young Americans for Liberty. Sean, and before we let you go here, we do have the midterms coming out. It's a bad timing here as we're dealing with inflation here. Maybe not so much bad timing for President Biden as he has 2 more years left in office, but maybe for a lot of the Dems that are on the ticket right now. Yeah. How do you see the midterms playing out this year, just in general, based on what's happening with inflation and some of the other issues that are being brought up in the public?
Yeah. Well, one quick correction to what I said earlier. AOC did not vote for the NDAA, but she did support job increases for herself and other Congress folks. So,
sure.
Still equally as bad. But as far as the midterms go, right, I do see a red wave, but the red wave will be only as good as if there are Liberty Republicans who are going to actually challenge the status quo and challenge the McConnell-controlled Senate and narrative. Because, when it's all said and done, a lot of these Republicans end up voting the same as Democrats, and the people don't want the status quo. The people need change. So that's my prediction.
That's an interesting take there, for sure. Sean Themea, Chief of Staff, once again, at Young Americans for Liberty. Should be an interesting midterm election season here coming up based on all that's happening and what will happen with the presidency in 2024. What will Democrats want? So we will find out. Sean, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Yeah, great to be here, Rich. Thanks for having me.